Ambassador Keth'var had seen civilizations rise and fall across 7 galaxies. Standing nearly 9 feet tall with crystalline skin that reflected the stars, he commanded respect wherever his diplomatic vessel traveled. For over 4 centuries, he had served the Galactic Preservation Council, an ancient organization dedicated to protecting developing worlds from the countless threats that lurked in the darkness between stars. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Council's mission was simple and noble: identify vulnerable civilizations, explain the dangers they faced, and offer protection in exchange for reasonable tribute and compliance with galactic law. It was a system that had worked flawlessly for millennia. Young species were grateful for the guidance, older civilizations appreciated the stability, and the galaxy remained peaceful under the Council's watchful eye. Today's assignment should have been routine. Earth, a small blue planet in an unremarkable solar system, had recently achieved faster-than-light travel. Their crude vessels had been detected by Council monitoring stations, triggering the standard first contact protocols. Keth'var had been chosen for this mission because of his excellent track record with primitive species and his reputation for patient explanation of complex galactic politics. The briefing materials painted a clear picture of Earth's situation. The humans had stumbled into space travel barely 50 years ago using chemical rockets and primitive fusion drives. Their technology was thousands of years behind the galactic standard. They had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, and no understanding of the quantum field manipulations that powered modern civilization. Most importantly, they had no idea what dangers awaited them in the vast cosmic wilderness they had just entered. Keth'var reviewed the threat assessment as his ship approached the Sol system. The Devourers were migrating through this sector, consuming entire worlds as they moved toward the galactic core. The Shadow Fleet had established hunting grounds just 3 parsecs away, preying on undefended shipping lanes. Most immediately concerning, the Crimson Horde was expanding its territory and would likely reach Earth's neighborhood within the next decade. Any one of these threats would be enough to completely annihilate human civilization. The Devourers could strip a planet bare in days, leaving nothing but lifeless rock. The Shadow Fleet specialized in psychological warfare that could drive entire populations to madness before destroying them. The Crimson Horde simply obliterated everything in their path with overwhelming military force. Earth needed protection desperately, and the humans didn't even know it. The Council's standard procedure was straightforward. Keth'var would make contact with Earth's leadership, explain the galactic situation, and offer the Council's protection. In exchange, Earth would provide raw materials, accept Council oversight of their space program, and agree to certain restrictions on their technological development. It was a fair deal that had saved countless civilizations from extinction. As Keth'var's ship entered Earth's solar system, he activated the Universal Translator and prepared his opening diplomatic transmission. The humans had established a space station around their moon that served as their primary spaceport and defense installation. It was a crude structure by galactic standards, but it represented humanity's first serious attempt at space-based infrastructure. The station's design reflected the humans' technological limitations. Instead of elegant energy fields and gravitational manipulation, they relied on rotating sections to create artificial gravity. Rather than sophisticated force barriers, they used physical armor plating and electromagnetic deflectors. Their communication systems operated on primitive radio frequencies instead of quantum entanglement networks. Keth'var opened a communication channel to the station, using protocols that any spacefaring civilization should understand. His message was carefully crafted to be non-threatening, while establishing his credentials as a representative of galactic authority. Earth Station, this is Ambassador Keth'var of the Galactic Preservation Council. I request permission to approach for diplomatic discussion regarding your planet's entry into the galactic community and the urgent protection services we offer against cosmic threats. The response came back almost immediately, but it was not what Keth'var expected. Instead of the formal diplomatic language used by civilized species, the human reply was casual and oddly enthusiastic. "Well, hey there, Ambassador. This is Commander Sarah Chen at Luna Station. Welcome to our neighborhood. We'd love to chat about whatever you've got to discuss. Come on over and we'll put some coffee on. Fair warning, though. The artificial gravity in Docking Bay 3 is acting up, so watch your step when you come aboard." Keth'var stared at his communication display in confusion. The humans were treating first contact with an advanced alien civilization like they were welcoming a neighbor for a casual visit. There was no fear, no ceremonial protocol, and no recognition that this moment represented a fundamental change in their species' relationship with the universe. More disturbing was their immediate invitation to board their station. Most primitive civilizations were cautious about allowing unknown aliens access to their infrastructure. The humans seemed completely unconcerned about potential threats or the diplomatic implications of the encounter. As Keth'var docked his ship at Luna Station, he noted the unusual modifications the humans had made to their basic design. What should have been a simple orbital platform had been expanded with sections that served no apparent military or commercial purpose. There were areas marked as hydroponics labs, recreational facilities, and something called a makerspace that seemed to be filled with fabrication equipment. Commander Chen met him at the airlock, and Keth'var's first impression was one of complete bewilderment. She was a small human female, wearing a uniform that looked more like casual work clothes than military dress. Her manner was friendly and relaxed, as if meeting aliens was something she did regularly. Ambassador Keth'var, right? That's a great name. Very dignified. I'm Sarah, but everyone just calls me Commander Chen. We've got a conference room set up where we can talk, and I've gathered some of our best people to hear what you have to say. They're really excited to meet you. As Chen led him through the station, Keth'var observed the human crew going about their duties with casual efficiency. They glanced at him with curiosity, but no fear or excessive deference. Several actually waved and said hello, as if encountering a 9-foot-tall crystalline alien was perfectly normal. The conference room contained a dozen humans representing various departments of their space program. Keth'var was introduced to scientists, engineers, military officers, and civilians whose job descriptions made no sense according to standard galactic classifications. There was a systems improvisation specialist, a resource optimization coordinator, and someone whose title was simply problem solver. Dr. Michael Rodriguez, the station's chief science officer, seemed particularly eager to begin the conversation. Ambassador, we're absolutely fascinated to meet you. This is humanity's first contact with an alien civilization, and we have so many questions. But please, tell us why you're here. Commander Chen mentioned something about protection services. Keth'var activated his holographic display and began the presentation he had given to hundreds of primitive civilizations over the centuries. The images showed the vast scope of the galaxy, the locations of major civilizations, and the territories controlled by various hostile forces. The galaxy is an ancient and dangerous place, Keth'var began in his most diplomatic tone. Your species has taken its first steps into space, but you have entered an environment filled with threats beyond your current understanding. The Galactic Preservation Council exists to protect developing civilizations like yours from these cosmic dangers. The hologram shifted to show images of the Devourers, massive biomechanical entities that consumed planets like living organisms eating fruit. The visuals were carefully chosen to demonstrate the scale of the threat without being so graphic as to cause panic. The Devourers are currently migrating through this galactic sector. They have consumed 17 worlds in the past century, leaving no survivors. Their feeding pattern will bring them through your solar system within the next 50 to 70 years. Keth'var expected the humans to react with appropriate fear and concern. Instead, Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward with obvious interest and asked, "How do they consume planets? Is it a chemical process or some kind of energy conversion? Do they completely disassemble the matter or just extract specific resources?" The question caught Keth'var completely off guard. Most primitive species wanted to know how to hide from the Devourers, or how far away they were. This human was asking about their feeding mechanisms as if he were studying an interesting scientific phenomenon, rather than learning about an existential threat to his entire species. The process is complex, Keth'var replied carefully. They use a combination of molecular disassembly and energy absorption. The specific details are not important for understanding the threat they represent. Actually, the details are exactly what's important, interrupted Dr. Lisa Park, the station's chief engineer. If we understand how they work, we can figure out how to stop them, or at least disrupt their feeding process. Do they have any known vulnerabilities? What about their approach patterns? How do they select target worlds? Keth'var found himself in the unusual position of being interrogated by the species he was supposed to be protecting. The humans were treating the devourer threat like a technical problem to be solved, rather than an unstoppable force to be avoided. The devourers have never been stopped, Keth'var explained patiently. They are among the oldest and most powerful entities in the galaxy. The only defense against them is early warning and evacuation assistance, which the Council provides to protected worlds. Commander Chen looked puzzled. So your solution is to run away? What about fighting them? What about trying to communicate with them? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Has anyone ever actually studied them up close to figure out how they work? Fighting the devourers is impossible, Keth'var said firmly. They are hundreds of kilometers long and possess technology that makes your most advanced weapons look like primitive tools. Communication has been attempted by many species over millennia with no success. The only rational response is to evacuate threatened worlds and resettle the populations in safer areas of the galaxy. The humans exchanged glances that Keth'var could not interpret. There was no fear in their expressions, but there was something else that made him uncomfortable. They looked like they were solving a puzzle, rather than learning about mortal danger. Major Tom Bradley, the station's military commander, spoke up for the first time. Ambassador, with respect, it sounds like nobody has ever really tried to fight these things. Running away from a problem isn't solving it. Has the Council ever considered organizing a coordinated defense? What about studying capture-devourer technology or developing specific countermeasures? The Council's primary mission is preservation of life, Keth'var replied with growing frustration. We save civilizations by moving them away from threats, not by engaging in hopeless battles against superior forces. The devourers have been active for millions of years. If they could be defeated, someone would have done it by now. Dr. Rodriguez was taking notes on a device that looked remarkably primitive compared to galactic standard technology. What about the other threats you mentioned? The Shadow Fleet and the Crimson Horde? How do they operate? Keth'var shifted his holographic display to show images of the Shadow Fleet, dark ships that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it. The Shadow Fleet uses psychological warfare to break the minds of their enemies before moving in for physical destruction. They project fear and despair directly into the brains of their targets, causing entire populations to descend into madness. Fascinating, said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had been introduced as the station's cognitive enhancement specialist. How do they interface with different neural structures? Human brains are quite different from most other species we've studied. Are their psychological attacks universal, or do they need to adapt their methods for each target species? Once again, the humans were responding to a mortal threat with scientific curiosity rather than appropriate fear. Dr. Walsh was asking about the technical details of psychological warfare as if she were planning to study it rather than hide from it. The Shadow Fleet's methods are adaptable to any sentient species, Keth'var said slowly. They have successfully destroyed hundreds of civilizations across the galaxy. Their psychological weapons are designed to exploit the fundamental fears that all conscious beings share. What if a species doesn't experience fear the same way? Asked Drive Walsh with obvious interest. What if their psychological profile doesn't match the standard patterns? How would the Shadow Fleet adapt to targets that respond differently to their usual techniques? Keth'var realized that Dr. Walsh was not asking hypothetical questions. She was analyzing the Shadow Fleet's capabilities and looking for weaknesses in their approach. The humans were treating galactic-level threats like problems to be solved, rather than forces to be fled from. The presentation of the third major threat produced an even more disturbing response. The Crimson Horde was a military empire that expanded through conquest, using overwhelming force to crush any resistance. Their fleets were massive, their weapons were devastating, and their strategic thinking was sophisticated after millions of years of constant warfare. The Crimson Horde is currently expanding in this direction, Keth'var explained as his hologram showed their territorial boundaries. They have never been defeated in direct combat. Their military doctrine is based on absolute superiority in numbers, technology, and tactical coordination. When they decide to claim a system, resistance is futile. Captain Rebecca Martinez, the station's tactical officer, studied the display with obvious professional interest. What's their command structure like? How do they coordinate their fleets? Do they have any preferred attack patterns or strategic weaknesses that have been identified? Captain Martinez, Keth'var said with growing exasperation, the Crimson Horde has conquered thousands of star systems, If they had exploitable weaknesses, some civilization would have found them by now. The only defense against them is to avoid their attention entirely. Maybe the problem is that everyone keeps running away instead of fighting back, Martinez replied with a shrug. It's hard to learn about an enemy's weaknesses if you never actually engage them in battle. Has anyone ever tried unconventional tactics against them? What about asymmetric warfare or irregular resistance methods? The casual way Captain Martinez discussed fighting the most feared military force in the galaxy made Keth'var question whether the humans truly understood what they were hearing. He decided to be more direct about the scope of the threats they faced. "Let me be absolutely clear," Keth'var said in his most serious diplomatic tone. "Each of these threats is capable of completely destroying your entire civilization. The Devourers could consume your planet and everyone on it. The Shadow Fleet could drive your entire species insane. The Crimson Horde could obliterate your solar system with a fraction of their total military power. These are not problems that can be solved with creativity or determination. They are forces of nature that must be avoided." The humans listened to his dire warning with polite attention, but their responses continued to baffle him. Instead of asking about evacuation procedures or protection costs, they wanted to know about the technical details of each threat. Dr. Rodriguez asked about the Devourers' reproduction cycles and whether they had any natural predators. Dr. Park wanted to know about the energy requirements for the Shadow Fleet's psychological projection systems. Captain Martinez inquired about the Crimson Horde's supply lines and manufacturing capabilities. Most disturbing of all, they began discussing these cosmic threats as if they were planning to study them rather than hide from them. They talked about collecting samples, gathering intelligence, and conducting experiments with the casual tone that other species used for routine scientific research. After 2 hours of increasingly bizarre questions, Keth'var decided to cut through the scientific curiosity and focus on the immediate practical matter of protection services. "The point of this briefing," he said firmly, "is to explain why Earth needs the Council's protection. We can provide early warning systems, evacuation assistance, and safe passage to protected territories when these threats approach your system. In exchange, we ask for reasonable tribute in the form of raw materials and compliance with certain galactic regulations designed to prevent conflicts." Commander Chen looked around the room at her colleagues, and Keth'var could see them exchanging meaningful glances. When she finally responded, her tone was polite but firm. "Ambassador, we really appreciate you taking the time to explain the galactic situation to us. The information you've shared is incredibly valuable, and we're grateful for the warning about these threats. However, I think there might be a fundamental misunderstanding about what humanity needs from this situation." Keth'var felt a growing sense of unease. This was not how primitive civilizations were supposed to respond to offers of protection from cosmic threats. "What kind of misunderstanding?" he asked carefully. "Well," Commander Chen said with a slight smile, "you keep talking about these threats like they're unstoppable forces that we need to run away from. But the way we see it, you've just given us incredibly detailed intelligence about 3 major problems that nobody has bothered to actually solve yet." "These are not problems to be solved," Keth'var protested. "They are cosmic forces that have existed for millions of years. Hundreds of advanced civilizations have tried to fight them and failed." Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward with obvious enthusiasm. "Ambassador, has anyone ever tried combining the approaches? What if you could use Devourer molecular disassembly technology against the Shadow Fleet's projection systems? What if you could reverse engineer Crimson Horde tactical coordination and apply it to defending against Devourers?" The suggestion that anyone would deliberately seek out these threats to study their technology was so far outside Keth'var's experience that he had no response. The humans were talking about cosmic horrors as if they were research opportunities. "You don't understand," Keth'var said desperately. "These entities have destroyed countless civilizations. They are not laboratories for scientific experimentation. They are existential threats that must be avoided at all costs." Captain Martinez spoke up again with her casual military confidence. "Ambassador, in my experience, the best way to deal with bullies is to punch them in the nose. Running away just encourages them to keep bullying people. Maybe the reason these threats are still around is because everyone keeps running instead of fighting back." The idea that the galaxy's most feared entities were simply bullies who needed to be confronted was so fundamentally alien to Keth'var's worldview that he struggled to process it. He had spent centuries helping civilizations escape from these threats, and the humans were suggesting that fleeing was the wrong approach entirely. Dr. Walsh added her own perspective with disturbing enthusiasm. What really interests me is that all three of these threats seem to rely on fear and intimidation as much as raw power. The Devourers are terrifying because they're unstoppable. The Shadow Fleet uses fear as a weapon. The Crimson Horde depends on their reputation for invincibility. What happens if you encounter a species that doesn't respond to intimidation the same way? Keth'var realized that Dr. Walsh was not speaking hypothetically. She was describing humanity's response to his briefing. The humans were not afraid of cosmic threats because they did not process fear the same way other species did. Dr. Walsh, Keth'var said slowly, are you suggesting that humanity would not be affected by these threats because you don't experience fear appropriately? Oh, we experience fear, Dr. Walsh replied cheerfully. We just don't let it stop us from doing what needs to be done. Fear is useful information about potential dangers, but it's not a reason to give up or run away. It's a reason to be more careful while you figure out how to solve the problem. The casual way she described treating fear as merely useful information rather than a motivation for self-preservation was deeply disturbing to Keth'var. Most species used fear as their primary survival mechanism. The humans seemed to view it as background noise that could be ignored when necessary. Commander Chen brought the discussion back to practical matters, with a question that made Keth'var's blood run cold. Ambassador, would it be possible for you to provide us with more detailed information about these threats? Specifically, we'd like to know their current locations, movement patterns, and any available technical specifications. We'd also appreciate any historical records of encounters with them. Why would you want that information? Keth'var asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. Well, Commander Chen said with obvious enthusiasm, if we're going to solve these problems, we need to understand them better. The more information we have, the better our chances of finding effective solutions. The realization hit Keth'var like a physical blow. The humans were not asking for protection from galactic threats. They were asking for intelligence briefings so they could hunt them down. Commander Chen, Keth'var said carefully, you cannot be seriously considering engaging these entities in combat. Your species has been in space for less than 50 years. Your technology is primitive by galactic standards. Your military experience is limited to conflicts on your own planet. That's true, Commander Chen admitted readily, but we've always been pretty good at learning new things quickly. Besides, it sounds like everyone else has been approaching these problems the same way for millions of years. Maybe what's needed is a fresh perspective from someone who doesn't know that these things are supposed to be impossible to defeat. Major Bradley added his own terrifying perspective. Ambassador, the way I see it, we have three major threats heading toward human space, whether we want them or not. We can either spend our time running away and hoping they don't catch us, or we can spend our time figuring out how to stop them permanently. Running away doesn't solve the problem for other species who don't have anywhere to run. The idea that a primitive species would consider taking responsibility for protecting the entire galaxy from cosmic threats was so far outside Keth'var's experience that he had no framework for understanding it. The humans were talking about self-sacrifice for the benefit of strangers as if it were obvious moral logic. Dr. Rodriguez offered the final comment that convinced Keth'var he was dealing with something completely unprecedented in galactic history. Ambassador, you mentioned that the Council's mission is to preserve life. That's a noble goal, and we respect it. But preservation isn't the same as protection. If you really want to preserve life throughout the galaxy, you need to eliminate the threats that endanger it. Running away from problems doesn't make them go away. It just delays them and ensures that someone else will have to deal with them later. Keth'var sat in stunned silence as the implications of Dr. Rodriguez's words sank in. The humans were right. The Council had spent millions of years moving civilizations away from threats without ever addressing the root causes of those threats. They had preserved individual species, while allowing the cosmic dangers to continue threatening everyone else. Dr. Rodriguez, Keth'var said slowly, what you're suggesting would require coordinating the military forces of hundreds of advanced civilizations and developing entirely new technologies specifically designed to counter each threat. The logistical challenges alone would be overwhelming. Yeah, it sounds like a big project, Dr. Rodriguez agreed cheerfully, but it's not impossible. just complicated. We're pretty good at handling complicated projects. The trick is breaking them down into smaller problems that can be solved individually. The casual way Dr. Rodriguez described reorganizing galactic civilization as merely a complicated project was typical of the human response to everything Keth'var had presented. They treated impossible challenges as interesting puzzles rather than insurmountable obstacles. Commander Chen concluded the meeting with a statement that would haunt Keth'var for the rest of his very long life. "Ambassador, we want to thank you again for bringing us this information. It's given us a much better understanding of the galactic situation and the challenges we'll need to address. We'd like to propose a different kind of relationship with the Council than the standard protection arrangement." "What kind of relationship?" Keth'var asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "We'd like to form a partnership," Commander Chen said with obvious excitement. "You provide us with intelligence and logistical support, and we'll handle the actual problem-solving. Think of it as a consulting arrangement, where the Council provides information and coordination, while humanity provides the creative solutions." The idea that a species barely 50 years into space travel was offering to solve problems that had plagued the galaxy for millions of years was so absurd that Keth'var could not formulate a response. Yet something about the humans' confidence and their completely different approach to impossible situations made him wonder if they might actually be capable of delivering on their outrageous promises. As Keth'var prepared to leave Luna Station, he realized that his simple diplomatic mission had become something far more complex. He had come to offer protection to a primitive species and instead found himself facing beings who wanted to protect the entire galaxy from threats that had never been successfully challenged. The journey back to Council headquarters would give him time to write his report, but Keth'var had no idea how to explain what he had experienced. How could he convey that humanity's response to cosmic threats was to treat them as problems to be solved, rather than forces to be avoided? How could he describe a species that viewed impossible odds as interesting challenges rather than reasons for despair? Most importantly, how could he explain to the Council that their millions of years of diplomatic experience had not prepared them for dealing with beings who refused to accept that anything was truly impossible? The humans had turned his carefully planned protection offering into a proposal for galactic military revolution, and they had done it with the casual confidence of people discussing weekend plans. As his ship left Earth's solar system, Keth'var looked back at the small blue planet that had produced such unprecedented thinking. Whether the humans would succeed in their impossible goals or simply get themselves destroyed in the attempt remained to be seen. But Keth'var was certain of one thing. The galaxy would never be the same after humanity began implementing their solutions to problems that everyone else had given up trying to solve. The real question was whether the rest of the galactic community was prepared for the revolution that humanity was about to unleash on cosmic threats that had terrorized civilizations for millions of years. Keth'var suspected they were not, and that realization was both terrifying and strangely hopeful at the same time. 6 months after Ambassador Keth'var's initial visit to Luna Station, the first Devourer scout vessel appeared at the edge of the Sol system. The massive biomechanical entity was smaller than a full-size Devourer, but still dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. It moved through space with the fluid grace of a living creature, its dark hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that served unknown purposes. Council monitoring stations throughout the sector detected the scout's arrival immediately. Emergency protocols activated across 17 different star systems as civilizations prepared for evacuation. The standard procedure was well established. Civilian populations would be moved to transport ships, while military forces provided covering fire during the retreat. Entire worlds would be abandoned to save the people who lived on them. Keth'var received the alert at Council headquarters and immediately departed for the Sol system. He expected to find human ships fleeing toward the outer planets, while hastily constructed refugee vessels carried their population to safety. Instead, his sensors detected something that made no sense according to any tactical manual in the galaxy. The human fleet was moving toward the Devourer scout. Dr. Elena Vasquez floated in the zero-gravity laboratory aboard the research vessel Curiosity, studying readings that would have terrified any rational being in the galaxy. Her team had spent the past 6 months developing what they cheerfully called Devourer interface protocols, based on Ambassador Keth'var's intelligence briefings and their own theoretical models. The approach was uniquely human in its complete disregard for conventional wisdom. Instead of avoiding the cosmic horror that had consumed 17 worlds, Dr. Vasquez had convinced the human leadership to let her attempt communication through biochemical analysis and pattern recognition. Initiating contact sequence, drive, Vasquez announced to her team as the Curiosity approached the scout vessel. Her voice carried the calm excitement of a scientist about to conduct a fascinating experiment, rather than someone potentially committing suicide on behalf of her entire species. The Devourer scout's bioluminescent patterns shifted as it detected the approaching human ship. The changes were subtle but clearly responsive, indicating some form of awareness or communication attempt. Dr. Vasquez's instruments recorded everything while her team began broadcasting their own light-based signals in mathematical progressions. "We're getting pattern repetition," reported Dr. James Liu from his sensor station. "The entity is copying our mathematical sequences and adding variations. It's definitely trying to communicate rather than just feeding." The discovery that Devourers could engage in communication was revolutionary. For millions of years, they had been viewed as mindless forces of destruction that consumed everything in their path. Dr. Vasquez's team had approached them as complex organisms with their own logic and motivations. "Try the metabolic efficiency protocols," Dr. Vasquez instructed. Her team began transmitting data about energy conversion and resource utilization that they had developed specifically for this contact attempt. The underlying message was simple. Humans understood the Devourer's need for resources and wanted to discuss alternative feeding methods. The Scouts' response was immediate and dramatic. Instead of the aggressive approach that had characterized every previous Devourer encounter, the entity began broadcasting complex biochemical formulas that Dr. Vasquez's team recognized as metabolic pathways for converting stellar energy directly into usable nutrients. "It's sharing its feeding technology with us," Dr. Liu said in amazement. "The Devourer is teaching us how to process energy the same way it does." Dr. Vasquez stared at the incoming data with growing understanding. The Devourers were not mindless destroyers. They were ancient gardeners whose feeding had gotten out of control due to metabolic inefficiencies that had developed over millions of years of evolution. They consumed planets because they had forgotten how to feed on stellar energy directly. "Send the optimization algorithms," Dr. Vasquez ordered. Her team transmitted mathematical models for improving energy conversion efficiency that human scientists had developed for their own fusion reactors. The principles were basic by human standards but apparently revolutionary for creatures that had been using the same inefficient feeding methods for eons. The Devourer Scout's entire biochemical signature changed as it processed the human suggestions. Its bioluminescent patterns became brighter and more complex, and its movement through space became more energetic. Within hours, the entity was demonstrating feeding techniques that drew energy directly from the local star, rather than seeking planetary matter to consume. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Sol system, Captain Isabella Martinez was implementing her own impossible solution to an equally impossible problem. The Shadow Fleet had been detected approaching through dark space, their psychological warfare systems already beginning to project fear and despair toward Earth. Captain Martinez commanded the experimental vessel Mindbridge, a ship that should not have existed according to any known engineering principles. Her crew had spent months developing what they called cognitive firewalls, based on human understanding of psychology and neurology, combined with technology reverse-engineered from captured alien systems. The Shadow Fleet's approach was detected by their characteristic effect on nearby space. Stars seemed dimmer in their vicinity, communications became unreliable, and sensitive individuals throughout the Sol system began experiencing unexplained anxiety and depression. The psychological attack was beginning before the enemy ships even came within visual range. "Initiating countermeasures," Captain Martinez announced as her crew prepared systems that had never been tested against their intended targets. The Mindbridge began broadcasting what Dr. Jennifer Walsh had termed cognitive jamming signals, designed to disrupt the Shadow Fleet's psychological projection systems. The human approach to psychological warfare was fundamentally different from anything the Shadow Fleet had encountered. Instead of trying to resist fear and despair, the Mindbridge's systems were designed to analyze and redirect those emotions into productive channels. Fear became heightened awareness, despair became motivation for creative problem-solving. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thompson monitored the psychological effects on the human crew as the Shadow Fleet drew closer. "The enemy projections are registering but not having the expected impact," he reported, with obvious satisfaction. Our people are experiencing the fear, acknowledging it, and then getting back to work. The Shadow Fleet's confusion was apparent in their increasingly desperate attempts to break human morale. They broadcast images of cosmic horror, projected feelings of hopelessness, and transmitted psychic screams that had driven entire civilizations insane. The human crew experienced all of these attacks, discussed them briefly among themselves, and continued with their mission planning. "It's like they're trying to scare us with ghost stories," commented Dr. Sarah Kim, the ship's cognitive specialist. "The projections are definitely creepy, but they're not stopping us from doing our jobs. Fear is just information about potential threats. It's not a reason to give up." Captain Martinez implemented the next phase of her plan with the casual confidence that characterized human responses to impossible situations. "Begin psychological counteroffensive," she ordered. "Let's see how they handle what we've prepared for them." The Mind Bridge began broadcasting its own psychological projections based on human concepts that the Shadow Fleet had never encountered. Instead of fear and despair, the human systems projected determination, curiosity, and what Dr. Walsh had termed aggressive optimism, directly into the minds of the Shadow Fleet crews. The effect was immediate and devastating. Beings that had spent millennia using fear as a weapon suddenly experienced emotions they had no framework for processing. The Shadow Fleet's disciplined formations began to break apart as their crews struggled with unfamiliar feelings of hope and creative inspiration. "Their command structure is collapsing," reported Lieutenant Commander Thompson with obvious amusement. "Apparently being forced to feel optimistic is more disruptive to their psychology than fear is to ours." The Shadow Fleet's retreat was as chaotic as their attack had been methodical. Ships fled in random directions as their crews attempted to escape the overwhelming experience of forced positivity. Several vessels actually began broadcasting requests for information about human philosophy and emotional management techniques. On the third front of humanity's impossible defense, Admiral Rachel Torres was coordinating the most audacious military operation in galactic history. The Crimson Horde had arrived in force, expecting to crush human resistance with overwhelming firepower and tactical superiority. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that refused to fight according to any known rules of warfare. Admiral Torres commanded the defense from the flagship Unconventional, a vessel that embodied humanity's approach to military engineering. The ship looked like it had been assembled from spare parts by someone who had never seen a proper warship, but its capabilities defied every assumption about combat effectiveness. "Horde fleet is assuming standard attack formation," reported Colonel David Park from the tactical station. "They're expecting us to respond with conventional defensive positions. Then let's not disappoint them by being conventional," Admiral Torres replied with the kind of smile that made enemy commanders nervous when they saw it in intelligence briefings. "Initiate Operation Confusion." The human fleet began implementing tactics that violated every principle of military science taught in academies across the galaxy. Instead of forming defensive lines or attempting to match the enemy's firepower, human ships scattered in seemingly random directions, while broadcasting contradictory signals and false sensor readings. Commander Lisa Chen's destroyer began performing what appeared to be elaborate dance maneuvers around a cluster of asteroids. Her movements seemed completely random until Crimson Horde targeting systems realized they had been herded into a complex three-dimensional maze where their superior numbers became a disadvantage. "Enemy flagship is trying to coordinate a flanking maneuver," reported Commander Chen cheerfully. "Unfortunately for them, they're now stuck behind asteroid 7742, with no clear shot at anything important." Major Robert Sterling's cruiser was implementing equally impossible tactics by using its industrial fabrication systems to create improvised weapons in real time during combat. Sterling's engineering team was literally inventing new forms of ammunition while the battle raged, adapting their designs based on observed Crimson Horde weaknesses. "We've got something new for them," Major Sterling announced, as his ship launched projectiles that looked nothing like conventional missiles. Magnetic net dispensers with gravitational anchors. They're designed to tangle up those fancy energy shield systems the Horde uses. The improvised weapons worked exactly as intended, causing Crimson Horde shields to collapse under the weight of metallic debris that their defensive systems had not been programmed to handle. What should have been a simple matter of deflecting incoming fire became a complex engineering problem, that the Horde's tactical computers could not solve quickly enough. Captain Maria Santos was demonstrating humanity's talent for psychological warfare against military opponents by using her ship's communication systems to broadcast what she called tactical confusion protocols directly to enemy vessels. The transmissions contained false orders, contradictory intelligence, and logical paradoxes designed to overwhelm Crimson Horde command systems. "I'm basically giving their computers nervous breakdowns," Captain Santos explained to her crew as they watched enemy formations begin to fragment. Their tactical systems are designed to process clear hierarchical commands. When you feed them circular logic and contradictory priorities, they start making random decisions instead of following doctrine. The Crimson Horde's response to human tactics shifted from confident aggression to desperate confusion within hours. Their commanders had trained for millions of years to fight enemies who followed predictable patterns. They had no protocols for dealing with opponents who treated warfare as an opportunity for creative expression. Admiral Torres watched the enemy fleet's growing disarray with professional satisfaction. "The Horde's problem is that they're fighting the last war instead of this one," she observed. "They keep expecting us to behave like every other enemy they've faced, but we're not following their script." The breakthrough came when Commander Johnson's science vessel successfully hacked into Crimson Horde communication networks using techniques developed for debugging human computer systems. Instead of trying to break military encryption, Johnson's team had approached Horde networks as if they were malfunctioning civilian computers that needed repair. "We're inside their command structure," Commander Johnson reported with obvious pride. Their security systems were designed to keep out military hackers, not IT support technicians. "We're basically providing customer service to their tactical computers while rearranging their battle plans." The psychological impact on Crimson Horde forces was devastating. Warriors who had conquered thousands of star systems found themselves receiving technical support calls from the enemy they were trying to destroy. Human technicians politely asked about system errors while simultaneously corrupting navigation data and rerouting communication channels. Admiral Torres coordinated the final phase of the operation with the casual efficiency that characterized human military leadership. "All units, begin Phase 3. Time to demonstrate why humans make terrible enemies but excellent allies." Instead of destroying the confused and demoralized Crimson Horde fleet, the human ships began offering technical assistance and tactical advice. Engineer crews provided solutions to the mechanical problems that human weapons had created. Medical teams offered psychological counseling for the trauma caused by fighting an incomprehensible enemy. The sight of human ships actually helping to repair the damage they had inflicted was more psychologically devastating to Crimson Horde morale than any conventional defeat could have been. Warriors who had built their identity around military superiority found themselves accepting aid from the primitive species they had come to conquer. Ambassador Keth'var arrived in the Sol system just as the impossible became routine. His sensors detected 3 separate impossible victories happening simultaneously across human space. The Devourers were learning new feeding techniques from human scientists. The Shadow Fleet was experiencing therapy sessions with human psychologists. The Crimson Horde was receiving technical support from human engineers. Dr. Elena Vasquez met Keth'var at Luna Station with news that would reshape galactic civilization. "Ambassador, we've made incredible progress with Devourer communication," she reported with obvious excitement. "It turns out they're not destroyers at all. They're gardeners who've been struggling with metabolic disorders for millions of years." The data Dr. Vasquez presented was revolutionary. The Devourers had originally been designed by an ancient civilization to cultivate stellar systems by converting excess energy into useful matter. Over eons, genetic drift and environmental changes had caused their feeding systems to become increasingly inefficient until they required planetary matter to supplement their energy intake. "The feeding problem is completely solvable," Dr. Vasquez explained as she showed Keth'var the biochemical improvements her team had developed. "We've optimized their metabolic pathways using principles from human nutrition science and industrial chemistry. They can return to their original purpose as stellar gardeners instead of planetary consumers." The implications were staggering. The galaxy's most feared threat could be transformed into its greatest asset for terraforming and system development. Devourers could create habitable worlds instead of destroying them, but only if their metabolic disorders were treated using techniques that combined human innovation with ancient alien biology. Captain Martinez provided equally revolutionary news about the Shadow Fleet encounter. The psychological projection systems they use are actually therapeutic tools that got corrupted over time, she explained to Keth'var. They were originally designed to treat mental illness and trauma in their own species. The Shadow Fleet had been the remnant of a civilization that had developed advanced psychological healing technology. When their society collapsed, the therapeutic systems had been repurposed for warfare by successor cultures that misunderstood their original function. The projections of fear and despair were corrupted versions of treatments for anxiety and depression. We've been working with their medical staff to restore the original therapeutic protocols, Captain Martinez continued. Instead of spreading psychological warfare, they want to return to their healing mission. Apparently, millions of years of causing mental illness instead of curing it has been devastating to their cultural identity. Admiral Torres brought news of the most significant breakthrough of all. The Crimson Horde had not been a military empire seeking conquest. They had been the emergency response force of an ancient galactic federation that had collapsed so long ago that they had forgotten their original mission. Their expansion pattern isn't random conquest, Admiral Torres explained as she showed Keth'var tactical analyses her staff had developed. They've been searching for surviving Federation worlds to protect and rebuild. The problem is that their databases are so corrupted, they can't distinguish between threats and civilians anymore. The Crimson Horde's military doctrine was based on protocols designed to rapidly deploy aid to worlds under attack. Their overwhelming force was meant to protect civilians, not conquer them. But millions of years of corrupted data and cultural drift had turned protectors into destroyers who no longer remembered what they were supposed to be protecting. We've helped them restore their original mission parameters, Admiral Torres continued. Once they remembered they were supposed to be peacekeepers instead of conquerors, everything changed. They're actually quite relieved to stop fighting and get back to their real job. As Keth'var absorbed the implications of what humanity had accomplished, he realized that his species' approach to galactic threats had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. The Council had spent millions of years treating symptoms instead of addressing root causes. "Ambassador," said Commander Chen as she joined the briefing, "we'd like to propose a new model for galactic security based on what we've learned from these encounters." The human proposal was characteristically ambitious in scope and revolutionary in approach. Instead of protecting civilizations by moving them away from threats, the galaxy would address threats by solving the underlying problems that created them. Devourers would be restored to their original function as stellar gardeners. Shadow Fleet vessels would resume their mission as psychological healers. Crimson Horde forces would return to peacekeeping and emergency response. The key insight, Dr. Vasquez explained, is that most cosmic threats aren't actually malevolent forces. They're ancient systems that have broken down over time and need repair rather than destruction. You just have to approach them as engineering problems instead of military targets. The transformation of galactic civilization began immediately. Devourer biotechnology was used to terraform barren worlds into garden paradises. Shadow Fleet's psychological expertise helped heal trauma and mental illness across hundreds of species. Crimson Horde logistics capabilities provided rapid disaster response and humanitarian aid throughout the galaxy. Within a year, the three greatest threats in galactic history had become the foundation of a new era of peace and prosperity. Worlds that had lived in fear for millions of years began to flourish under the protection of former enemies who had rediscovered their original purpose. Keth'var found himself in the unprecedented position of representing a galactic community that was expanding and improving instead of merely surviving. The Council's mission evolved from preservation through avoidance to growth through problem-solving. Ancient threats became valuable allies, and impossible challenges became opportunities for creative collaboration. The humans had not just defended their world from cosmic threats. They had healed the galaxy by refusing to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. Their approach to impossible situations had revealed that the universe's greatest horrors were actually its greatest treasures waiting to be restored to their original purpose. Dr. Rodriguez summarized humanity's contribution to galactic civilization in characteristically modest terms. "We didn't really do anything special," he explained to Keth'var during a celebration at Luna Station. "We just treated these entities like complex systems that needed troubleshooting instead of monsters that needed to be fought or avoided." The casual way Dr. Rodriguez described reshaping galactic civilization as basic troubleshooting was perfectly representative of human psychology. They had approached cosmic threats with the same practical problem-solving attitude they used for fixing broken machinery or debugging computer software. The universe is full of broken things that used to work properly, Dr. Rodriguez continued. The trick is figuring out what they were supposed to do originally and helping them remember how to do it again. Fear and avoidance don't fix anything. They just let problems get worse over time. As Keth'var prepared his final report to the Council, he reflected on the fundamental transformation that humanity had brought to the galaxy. For millions of years, civilizations had accepted that some problems were unsolvable and some threats were unstoppable. The humans had proven that assumption wrong by treating impossible challenges as interesting puzzles rather than reasons for despair. The galaxy had been healed, not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the simple human conviction that everything could be fixed if you understood how it was supposed to work. They had transformed cosmic horrors into valuable allies by approaching them with curiosity instead of fear and creativity instead of conventional wisdom. In his final report, Keth'var wrote a conclusion that would become the foundation of new galactic policy for eons to come. Humanity has demonstrated that the universe's greatest threats are often its greatest opportunities disguised by time, corruption, and misunderstanding. The key to galactic security is not avoiding problems but solving them at their source through innovative thinking and persistent effort. The small blue planet that had asked, "Defending from what?" had answered their own question by proving that the best defense was not protection from threats, but transformation of threats into allies. They had defended not just Earth, but the entire galaxy, by refusing to accept that any challenge was truly impossible to overcome. As human ships began spreading throughout the galaxy carrying Devourer biotechnology, Shadow Fleet healing systems, and Crimson Horde peacekeeping protocols, Keth'var realized that he was witnessing the beginning of a new era in cosmic civilization. The age of running from problems had ended. The age of solving them had begun. And it had all started with a species that had looked at the galaxy's greatest threats and asked the most dangerous question imaginable. What if we tried to fix them instead of hiding from them? The answer to that question had changed everything, proving once again that the most powerful force in the universe was not fear or force, but the simple human refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible when you approached it with enough creativity, determination, and willingness to see problems as opportunities waiting to be discovered. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.